Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at the Sacks-Herenstein Center. I see many wonderful students, friends from Shaare Zedek, and followers of the Sacks-Herenstein Center online educational opportunities. We began last week with a conversation that, and we're happy to share the recording in the chat, with Dr. Matthew Levitt about the political state of affairs between Israel and Iran, things that are changing very rapidly. Today, we're taking a very different view. And I'll begin with a beautiful post that appeared today. Babies delivered during this war at Shaare Zedek, many of them in shelters, now have onesies that say Yesh li ima Leviah, I have a mother who is a lioness. And we'll drop that photo in for you. We have with us, and honored to have with us, Professor Yonatan Halevy, the president of Shaare Zedek Hospital, who for over 3 decades was the director general of the hospital. He's won the Yakir Yerushalayim Award, a very prestigious award for his work in medicine and healthcare more generally. I'm honored to call him a friend, and I've been part of the Shaare Zedek family for the past 10 years and been able to see how it's a hospital with a heart. Dr. Halevy, Yonatan, welcome. It's so special to have you here with us today.
Good to be here.
So let's talk about what happens at Shaare Zedek when a siren goes off.
So, first of all, running a hospital during wartime, whether the wartime is an intifada that took place in Jerusalem between 2000 and 2004, or an unprecedented type of war where hospitals are under threat of direct hit, and this was proven in Soroka, and as I will probably allude to later, the shot on Toraka, which I think opened the direct hit of Soroka Hospital in Beersheba, which I think happened on, I believe, Friday or Sunday morning, a few days ago, really changed our approach. And what happens in the hospital when the sirens go off really depends how well protected, how well shielded our hospital. There are 29 general hospitals in Israel. All of them, at the eve of this war, 12 days ago, were full with patients. In Shaare Zedek, we had 1,100 patients on Thursday night, Friday morning, when that happened. About 200 of them were mothers who gave birth in the previous 48 hours. And the main task is really to protect these patients, which is very difficult when you have a main building that was built over 50 years ago, was completed, and the standards were totally different. Today, unfortunately, we got a very bitter proof that even the famous Mamad, not always resistant, definitely not to direct hit. So this is a major challenge. So we compromise. What happens when the sirens go off is that the staff and patients get away from the windows and go to inside corridors of the hospital. There are hospitals in Israel, mainly Rambam in Haifa and Barzilai in Gaza, because of the missiles that came from Lebanon and from Gaza, that had underground hospitals use their parking lots in Rambam, for instance, already, I think, 10 or 12 years ago, to be able to turn a regular parking lot within hours to a very protected shelter. Most hospitals in Israel did not have it. But Shaare Zedek is built on a mountain, and it is 10 floors, where the ground floor is the 4th floor. The 0 floor, 1st floor, 2nd and 3rd floor are not completely underground, but at least from 3 sides they are underground, and they are open only in one side. What we did, for instance, in 1991 with the Iraqi Bay War, Milchemet HaMifratz, we call it in Israel, we transferred all the patients to the long corridors on 0 ground, 1st ground, 2nd and 3rd. But at that time, the census of the hospital was around 400 patients. Today it's over 1,000. It's also dangerous in these, you cannot treat them properly. So when the sirens got off, everybody who can work, whether a patient, if they are mobile, they go into inside corridors. But, and I have to emphasize at the outset of this interview that I do not run the show in Shaare Zedek today. I did it up until 6 years ago for 31 years, so I can tell you experiences from the Intifada. But I am definitely a witness to what's happening these days in the hospital, when the hospital is run by my colleague, successor, in a way, my student, but he grew up to be really a caliber in the world of heads of hospital, Professor Ofer Marin. And he was very smart because after October 7th, he suggested that we use a bunker that we have under our new oncology center that was built with the best standards, but it's a relatively small building. Our main building is about 700,000 square feet. The oncology ambulatory building is about 120,000 square feet. But 5 floors underground, there was a bunker that contained only on a small area of its size contained the machinery for the building. And he came after October 7th and he said, and we also raised money for that, $4 million. Let's turn this bunker into a place where if missiles fall in Jerusalem or in Israel, we can mobilize at least the most difficult and helpless patients, those in the ICUs. And Shaare Zedek has many ICUs. The largest is the neonatal, but the neonatal was built after 2006, after the Second Lebanese War, when the standards were also, it's fully protected, although it's on the 7th floor of the Children's Hospital of the Next Generation building, it's fully protected. But the respiratory ICU, surgical ICU, neurosurgical ICU, cardiothoracic ICU, coronary CCU, coronary care unit are not protected at all. Even more, all the cardiology, cardiac surgery, and neurosurgery were in the upper floor of the hospital, on the 10th floor of the hospital. So what we did on the first day of the war, first of all, released out of the 1,100 patients, we discharged 350 patients who were not urgent, who could go home. Some of them were after elective surgery, but on the verge of recovery. They were supposed to be discharged a day later. Many of the mothers who gave birth were discharged after 24, 36 hours instead of the usual 48 hours. So immediately our census went down to 700 patients. And that was Friday, before Shabbat on the first day of the war, Friday 10 or 11 days ago. Then we transferred all the ICU patients to the bunker, to the underground floor, which is fully protected. According to the regulations in Israel, if you have at least 5 ceilings above you, and all of them are underground, so the 5th floor underground is considered fully protected even for a direct hit. It would not stand a B-2 bombing, but definitely with all the really half a ton of explosives that the Iranian missiles carried, it is still protected. So our mind was put to rest with that. Then we had a problem. Our delivery rooms, 22 delivery rooms, the largest birthing center in the world, delivering over 20,000 babies a year, is on the 9th floor of the hospital. And both the mothers and the staff did not feel protected at all. So we transferred them to the 2nd floor that is partially protected, to the surgical day hospital. And we went back to the times that instead of every mother having their own room, very vast room, this was an 18 stretchers hall, and they were delivering behind curtains with the midwives, and it went very well. We even did not return them today. We are waiting for tomorrow to see if this ceasefire lasts, and probably tomorrow morning we'll go to our usual 22 separate delivery rooms, our birthing center. So that's in general, we are committed to protect our patients. We were not fully satisfied with what we have. And here I come to the last innovation. Shaare Zedek completed 4 years ago an 8-floor underground garage where all the 8 floors, except the upper one, all of them are underground. And
Mhm.
we, within the last 72 hours, converted the lower 3 floors. We started only with one. It's called, um, it's the third floor below the bottom floor in our underground garage was turned within 48 hours. It's unbelievable, from a parking lot to an underground hospital. And we will go on completing the other 2 floors despite the ceasefire, because that's how we can open a 300-bed underground floor. Now, I know that you have more questions, and if you
I
don't
do.
ask me now, I will finish the time by telling you, because it's very interesting, to explain how the hospital under these conditions is run on a day-to-day basis. And I emphasize again that I was not the one who ran it. I was present in all the Zoom meetings, 7 a.m. in the morning and 7 p.m. in the evening, that Professor Marin conducted. Every morning at 8 o'clock, there is a management meeting. I attended, so I'm definitely updated. But it's very important for me to emphasize that I did not run the show.
Mhm.
You invited me
But you
and
had a
many.
front seat. You had a front seat.
Say it again?
You have a front seat. You're watching,
Okay.
you're
Yeah.
watching and
And
preparing.
Marin was too busy to appear here today, so he asked me to do it. And also, we know each other on a personal basis, and he knows about this interview. So you're invited to go on.
Yeah, thank you. It's very hard sitting in the United States, Jonathan, to imagine w- what a hospital might look like in Israel. In other words, you think about the hospital visits that any of us have had to pay, we don't think to ourselves, where's the shelter, right? Is this absolutely urgent? Is this elective? Am I going to be safe? Is my baby going to be safe? You actually have probably the most famous parking lot in Israel because it appeared in the series Shtisel, the Shaare Zedek parking lot, many years ago. And now you think that that parking lot is now, an underground, essentially an underground bunker. How do you prepare your medical staff, your doctors, your nurses, consultants, the social workers? How do you prepare them psychologically for the mental, emotional load of carrying all this? And as you're describing, Jonathan, these things happen very quickly. As you think about everybody working around the clock to change the hospital, to accommodate, and just to move patients to those rooms. So what kind of support do you have for the people working there?
So before talking about the emotional, psychological support, I want to talk about the preparations. Unfortunately, Jerusalem is a terror-stricken city too frequently. So we prepare ourselves every year. There is a drill run by the military that prepare all the staff, each one of the 5,000 people working in the hospital and the 125 Bnot Shirut Leumi, the
Those
National
doing
Service
national
Girls,
service, yeah.
know exactly what to do when the sirens go off. And it is updated time and again, drill time and again, and even more than that, during wartime, every morning at 7 a.m., there was a Zoom meeting, even today, 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. First of all, we switched to 12-hour shift because many of the nurses cannot come. They don't have arrangement for the children. So we shift the whole hospital shift to 12 hours, 12 hours. I can tell you that my successor, Ofer Marin, this night is going to be his first night home. He slept in the hospital for the whole 12 days. So did his deputies, and so did all the senior physicians who were on call. The residents are doing the work. Usually, the senior physicians who are on call are at home. At the first 5 days of the 12-day war, they were compelled. They slept in they're not compelled. They did it very willingly. And then they could be at home if they could come within 10 minutes. because
Mm.
the fear was that will be a missile attack
And
with
they won't
mass
be able to.
casualty
Yeah.
event. The streets will be blocked and they will not be able to reach. So there are many of them who live in Beta Kerem, which is 6 to 7 minutes walk, and they rotated between themselves. And the one who covered was within 10 minutes from the hospital. And then in these Zoom meetings every 12 hours, 120 to 130 people who are in managerial positions, both from the medical staff and from the administratives and maintenance staff, they were updated about what's going on. And this decreases the uncertainty and make them partners. And these meetings were conducted in a very supportive, encouraging way. The managers, again, headed by Ofer Marin, and I attended these meetings too, they really paid a lot of attention how to support the staff, to make them a feeling that they are not alone. The head of the hospital is sleeping in the hospital. He's going around the corridors of the hospital. I can give you an example, and I don't think I'm allowed to say it because I really did not fulfill an extremely active, but I took Adina, my wife, not took, we went together 2 hours before Shabbat, this Friday, 4 days ago, and we went to visit the staff in Shaare Zedek to encourage them, and we went to the most vulnerable places, to the bunker with the 70 ICU beds, where most of the patients are on respirators, so we cannot encourage the patients. But the staff was thrilled to see us. We
Mm.
went to the delivery room on the second floor, on the partially protected floor, and the management of the hospital did it every day, not Friday afternoon, but did it every day, day and night. That's how you keep the cohesion of the staff. That's how you inform them on what's happening. Every such session starts by telling them the news that come from the army about the prospects of what's going to happen today, as far as we can know it. And again, talking about the stocks in the hospital, that we are fully stocked. We're talking about whether this day we will see ambulatory patients. We tried, as opposed to Hadassah, not to stop the regular activity in the hospital.
Mm.
And we are in the center of town as opposed to Hadassah, so people can travel 10 or 15 minutes. If the sirens go off while they are on the way, they can, within a minute and a half, they can find a protected area. And we had only 30% decrease in our elective, non-urgent activity, ambulatory and inpatient. So that's the answer. Now, in addition to that, after October 7th, we recruited many psychologists. We got a very generous donation that Rachel here knows very well about it, that
Rachel is
enable
Rachel Wolf,
us.
CEO of the American Committee of Shaare Zedek, and shout out to her for all of her work and during this war, and also helping us to connect with Professor Halevy.
Yeah, well, I agree with every compliment that you give, Rachel. And we get a very generous donation that enabled us to open a resilience center that was intended especially for the soldiers, the wounded soldiers. 1,500 of them were treated, operated on in Shaare Zedek for the post-traumatic experience, but it is for the staff as well. There are no wounded from Gaza, almost no wounded. By the way, on Friday, a helicopter with 6 lightly injured soldiers from Gaza landed in Shaare Zedek, but all these supportive, emotional, psychological resources were directed to the staff. So there was a lot of activity to support the staff physically, emotionally. You saw, for instance, as a complement to the mothers, you saw the shirts that every newborn got with a big, inscription. My mother is a lioness. This is only one of the many acts that were done in order to keep the cohesion, the devotion, and the feeling of togetherness. By the way, we opened kindergarten where 300 children came every morning. And there were teachers there, national service girls, because otherwise we could not have the critical mass of nurses whose
Mhm.
husbands are in Gaza on reserve service, and they had to come for a 12-hour shift. So we took care of their children. It's a very complicated issue. I described only part of the activity in the hospital.
Yeah, but it's so inspiring. It's really it's breathtaking. It's really breathtaking. We do have a question, Jonathan, from one of our listeners. Is does every hospital set its own policy? I imagine that there's the internal work, but that is certainly with what happened last week at Soraka, you're exchanging ideas. You're working as as a network of hospitals, or is it really more internal?
Well, in general, what happens during wartime is that hospitals are heavily regulated by the Ministry of Health and by the Surgeon General, the Medical Corps of the Army. They both visit the hospital. I can tell you that in these 12 days, the Director General of the Ministry of Health, Mr. Bar visited the hospital twice, and every hospital in Israel, and the purpose of these visits are to verify that the patients are protected well, are shielded as much as possible. Maybe he had remorse that he did not allocate more resources during peacetime, because when we built only a few years ago our underground garage, the Shtisel garage, as you mentioned, we asked to get the means in order to be able to turn it into an underground hospital within hours, and we were declined. And we did it on our own in the last 48 to 72 hours. So he visited twice. Last night there was a visit of the Minister of Health, and they are actually in charge not of the medical activity of the hospital. When you talk about the difference between hospital, the management of the hospital each hospital has an emergency management plan for mass casualty events and for war. This was an unusual war because nobody planned for a direct hit of a
Right.
missile with 300 to 400 kilograms of explosive. I mean, nobody prepared for that. We witnessed, unfortunately, in the last minutes before the ceasefire this morning, how a direct hit, even to a shelter, to a mamad, led to 4 or 5 victims there. And once Soroka was hit, we were all afraid that hospitals in Israel are targeted because people who are really have no morals at all, if they want to achieve mass casualties, they could bombard the hospital. And that's when we started our activity with the underground garage, because I admitted that until then, patients were only partially shielded, partially protected, except the bunker with the 70 ICU patients.
So the bunker with the 70 ICU patients is a good segue to my next question. You have had to triage your patients. There's, elective surgeries have been put to the side, even though those elective surgeries can be very important, especially for the elderly. Um, how do you make those decisions? And, is there an ethics committee that makes those decisions? Is it, do you know that certain departments, there's a cardiac issue versus a maternity issue? How does that work?
Well, at the beginning, when the war broke out on Friday morning, all the patients that were in our various ICUs, they were triaged for ICU before the war. It
Mhm.
was decided whether after complicated surgery, severe injury, respiratory crisis, we have 14-bed respiratory intensive care, whether after surgery. So they were moved immediately to the bunker. Within these 12 days, some of them were discharged. At the beginning, we did not have 70 patients. So it's actually the triage is no different than during peacetime. There is always, there are discussions. Who should benefit most from an ICU bed? Most hospitals in the world do not have enough ICU beds that every patient that can benefit medically from them should be there. And the difference between a regular department bed and an ICU bed is that in a department in Israel, a nurse is in charge of 8 to 12 beds, while the rule in an ICU is that a nurse is in charge of two beds of two patients only. So it's a very personal care. Then the monitoring systems are completely different. But we have intermediate units in every department of internal medicine. We have a 38-bed department. We have 5 beds that are high-level care. They are monitored. There is one nurse on 5 patients. They were also moved to the bunker. So we didn't have to triage, especially for the bunker. It was the usually triage according to the acuity index, the level of the risk of the patient, risk to his life, does he need monitoring or not, and anybody who was triaged to have high-level care was moved to the bunker, and usually we don't have more than 70 patients. You have also to understand, and we witnessed it in the COVID, in the corona epidemic as well. People don't go out of home, so there are many, many less road accidents. People don't go to the movie. They are not in congested places. There are no weddings, less infectious disease. So the bunker with the 70 beds was between 90 to 95% capacity, and we had a very strong feeling to the most difficult, helpless patients on respirators in the hospital. They were very well protected from a direct hit of a missile.
All right. There's a lot to take in here, Yonatan. Um, I wanna move to maybe a more reflective place. We call this leadership and life saving. You're part of the hospital ecosystem, but you're also now have taken a different kind of role. You were the director general of the hospital during multiple wars. Are there how's this different as you're reflecting from a leadership perspective about decisions that you made to prepare for various wars? The Intifada was a very different kind of war. It was really a war on citizens where there were so many terrorist attacks, cafes and buses. Um, you've had a memoir full of difficult leadership decisions. Can you sort of take us into your mindset?
Yeah, I will talk about two incidents. One was the most major mass casualty event that I witnessed and ran the hospital through. And the other one was the Intifada, which is completely different because every Motzei Shabbat there was terror activity and 5 or 6 people arrived in the hospital. So the mass casualty event was not a terrorist activity, I must say. You remember there was a wedding in a
Yes.
wedding hall called Versailles about
In
20,
Talpiot,
22 years
right?
ago.
In
Yeah,
Talpiot? Yeah.
yeah, in Talpiot, where where the people danced and the floor collapsed. 100, and this was 10 minutes ride from Shaare Zedek. One has to know, Jerusalem has two level 1 trauma units, only in Hadassah and Karem and Shaare Zedek. Hadassah Mount Scopus does not have, they have an emergency room, not a trauma level 1. For trauma level 1, you need at least 3 departments that do not exist in small community hospitals. Neurosurgery, cardiothoracic surgery, more for the thoracics than for the cardiac in trauma, and vascular surgery. Mount Scopus, Hadassah does not have these 3 departments. We are the only trauma level 1 center that is in the center of the city. So in Versailles, where the panic was really big, I
Mm.
think it was around 11 p.m., I rushed to the hospital immediately. And I think I arrived with the first ambulances. You had to do triage to 127 patients. We were lucky that it was 11 p.m. and not 9 a.m., where our 25 operation theaters are taken by elective and urgent surgery. But you have to triage who will be operated first to see for stocks of blood immediately. It's a very complex issue, and there is an emergency management plan, and everybody is involved, including the IT department that plays a very central role in registering, following these patients. They computerize their medical records. They did not exist during the Versailles time, but they do exist for the last 10 to 15 years. So this is one kind. In the Intifada, the unknown was really, I mean, every day was a different day, but it's the same emergency management plan. It's the same need to support the staff. It's the same, it calls for the presence of the director of the hospital, and there is the head of the trauma unit. We both appear in the media because the media immediately comes to the hospital after every case. Now, the Intifada had also few unbelievable, surreal stories. I'll tell you two of them. One of them is that one of our maintenance staff on a Motzei Shabbat, where a bomb detonated in Machane Yehuda market, was working cleaning the emergency room, and his daughter was brought in, severely wounded. A nurse who came from Gush Etzion and crossed the tunnels on the way to the hospital, a sniper from Bejala shot at her and he missed. The IDF responded and wounded him, took him to Shaare Zedek. She got to her shift in emergency room and she found her shooter lying there. And I don't know if she personally had to treat him. So there are surreal scenarios in a city where the largest hospital, the only one in the center of the city, fulfills really such a central role in treating trauma patients, or in this war that really missiles, by the way, did not fall on Jerusalem, but
Mm,
the sirens, went off very frequently. The staff was very tired, very tired. Many of them came to the 12-hour shift after a sleepless night. And the key and the secret is to support them, to go about the hospital, all the managers, not only the director general, the heads of the units, to go about the corridors, to ask everybody, how does he feel? What's the situation at home? How can we be of help? That's the end every 2 hours, this Zoom meeting that take 15 to 20 minutes to update the managers who will update all those who are under them. And every such meeting, Ofer Marin ended it by saying, support your staff, ask them what's going on. So the cohesion was unbelievable. And I saw it in every tour of the hospital, Friday afternoon, which was already the 8th day of the war. It started a Friday a week earlier, and the spirit of the staff before Shabbat was unbelievable.
mm.
Although I am sure, not everybody had arrangement for the children. There were no kindergartens in the hospital on Friday afternoon. Many of our nurses, they come from the Dati Leumi, that most of their husbands between the ages 25 and 45 were in the army on Miluim. You need a good
It's
savta in order
yeah, it's
to be able to come.
surround sound service, right? On every level of society, supporting, supporting the war effort. You mentioned this really remarkable case of a nurse who was hit by, just missed the sniper hit and goes into the hospital and sees that the sniper actually is a patient in her hospital. And it brings me to a larger question about what it means to run medical services in a democracy in the region. You treat terrorists, you treat them. Um, do you want to share any thoughts about that? Because that involves a lot of discipline, like emotional discipline.
It's a very interesting question. I must tell you, I'm 37 years with Shaare Zedek, as you said, 31 as the CEO of the hospital. And up until the Gaza war, the October 7th, there was no hesitance to treat terrorists. There was no hesitance at all. One has to understand, they always ask the ethical question, how do you prioritize? Who do you treat first? In a scenario, in a setup for a hospital, the question does not exist. We have such a large emergency room and so many surgeons and orthopedic surgeons. There was never a matter of triaging or leaving someone, like in the battlefield, that you have limited manpower and you save those who have more chance to survive and you leave to die those who are dying. It doesn't happen in a hospital setup. So this question, do you take terrorist, a severely wounded terrorist, that inflicted it on itself, that was wounded by our forces. Do you treat him before you treat a lighter wounded? It does not exist. And there was no question, and the staff was committed. Don't forget that 1/3 of our staff are Arab themselves, but I think this is your next question, and I'll answer that later. But we never had a problem. October 7th was different. You know, so many people of the staff lost their beloved ones. There
Mm.
were 14 next of kins. I'm not talking about grandchildren of nurses, physicians, maintenance staff who are older. I'm talking about next of kin, losing a son, sometimes even a daughter, a brother, a sister was very common. And if you go from next of kin to others, and there was a decision, all the heads of hospitals in Israel went to the Ministry of Health and said, terrorists that come from Gaza, please save them somewhere else. And they opened the field hospital in the army in the Negev where they were directed. That was the only case in my 37 years where I fully understood the staff and we did not treat terrorists. There was one or two exceptions, but all those that were wounded and brought to Israel or were wounded in Israel were treated in a separate military hospital and definitely not in the standard of care that we treated. Look, Sinwar was operated and he had a brain tumor and the brain tumor was removed when he was in Israeli prison, was removed in Hadassah.
Mm.
Maybe if we had not treated him and left him with a brain tumor, there would not be October 7th. So it brings you to think about, medical ethics, but nobody hesitated. A prisoner like Sinwar was treated and operated at neurosurgical. At that time, it was 20 years ago, Shaare Zedek had no neurosurgery, so we did not have to cope with the problem.
Yeah, a patient is a patient, but as you're describing, post October 7th, the tenor of the country has really changed, and the medical care is provided, but maybe not in the same kind of settings. To just take a sort of different turn, Yonatan, you are a beautiful Balkore, a reader of the Torah, and I've heard you laying on many occasions.
Thank you.
Um, what in the Torah gives you hope right now? In other words, is there a text that you say this text has really inspired me in the work that I do and in waking up every day and doing this kind of work?
Well, as you know, in Parshat Shavua, you always can find an answer to your question in every Parshat Shavua. And this Parashat Shlach is really no doubt that when you live here in Israel and your prime minister for 30 years tells you that Iran is the main existential threat to the state of Israel, so you cannot avoid quoting the pasuk from Parashat HaShavua, "Alo na'aleh ve'yarashnu אותה, כי יכול נוכל לה." We shall surely go up and take possession of it, for we can certain prevail over it. And that applies to Iran. So I think every week I get inspiration from a different pasuk, and there is always something that is directly related to Inyanei Deyoma.
Yeah, I mean that's such a beautiful thought, that nothing sort of stands in the way. There's no roadblocks when it comes to the centrality of Israel in our lives. So I guess you answered this in part before, Yonatan. Every hospital is a microcosm of society. Not only does your hospital treat Arab Israelis, of course, and terrorists on the occasion when that's happened, it's staffed by Arab Israelis on the highest levels. Help us understand how you maintain sort of the center and in a very politically wrought climate.
I can tell you that this is one of the heartwarming phenomena in running Shaare Zedek. Jerusalem is a mixed city. Haifa is also a mixed city, but
Yes.
out of 280,000 or maybe 300,000 people there are 25,000 Arabs. Jerusalem today, and I'm not talking about the greater metropolitan area with all the settlements and so on, Jerusalem itself has 1 million people. It's the first year that it crossed the 1 million. I serve voluntarily as chairman of the board of the Jerusalem Institute for Demographic Research. And we publish every year, we call it in Hebrew, Al Netunaich Yerushalayim, on the data on Jerusalem, and we crossed the 1 million people. Out of these 1 million people, whether we like it or not, 400,000 are Arabs. Now, Jerusalem is served by two major hospitals, Hadassah and Karem and Shaare, each one with around 1,000 beds. There are small community hospitals in the east part of the city, Augusta Victoria, Mukassed. They are all small community hospitals. They cannot treat severe burns, severe trauma cases. But this brings to it that about 25%, not the 40% or 39%, that is the percentage of Arabs residing in Jerusalem, but 25% of the patients in Hadassah and in Shaare Zedek are Arabs, and more or less 25 to 30% of the staff.
Mm,
And I can tell you, they never in 37 years, and I don't know how nationalistic their ideas, politics stops at the doorstep of the hospital.
mm,
You know, this year, even before October 7th, was a very difficult year. Among the 5,000 employees, let's talk about the 3,500 or 3,600 Jews you can find from extreme right to extreme left. There
right.
was a full understanding that politics stops at the doorstep of the hospital. And you could see, and Adina and I saw it in our tour on Erev Shabbat, on this last Friday, in the bunker with the 70 patients, a nurse with a boo-boo, with with a
Elaborate head covering.
modern fashionable cover of her head, working hand in hand with a nurse with hijab, both of them attending the patient with the same devotion, communicating between them. Although I am sure that some of these nurses, when they go back home to Eli and to Ofra, they represent extreme right-wing ideas. It stops on the doorstep of the hospital, and we embedded this culture. It's not only me, but this culture was embedded for years in Shaare Zedek, and even during this war. The only exception was really terrorists imported from Gaza. That's the only case where there was consensus that they should not be treated.
Yeah.
And it's heartwarming to see it, how devoted they are.
It's heartwarming to see, and it's really a remarkable slice of life, the community that you created. I feel very verklempt in this conversation, actually, and I wanted to conclude our conversation today with something that Rabbi Sacks wrote. He wrote, never, he was talking about Jerusalem, that the heart of Jewish faith is Yerushalayim, the holy city, whose name is peace, comes from Shalom. And he said, never has a city had such power over people's imagination. Never were people more loyal than our ancestors who endured 20 centuries of exile and persecution. So their children or grandchildren or great grandchildren would come home to Yerushalayim, Yer Kodesh, the holy city, the home of the Jewish heart. We know that you run and ran a hospital of the heart. We thank you for being a true Yakir Yerushalayim, as the award was, a treasure of Jerusalem, and for protecting Jerusalem's residents. Thank you so much for your courage and your bravery and for being with us today at the Sacks-Herenstein Center.
Thank you very much. And I hope, which still remains to be proven, that we are entering a new era in the Middle East. I expect many of American youth, American young physicians and other professionals to make Aliyah and to come. And I see a very bright future for Israel in general and for Jerusalem in particular.
Yes, and I'll share another Yakir Yerushalayim. My last granddaughter was our last granddaughter was born in Yerushalayim at Shaare Zedek Hospital. So my debt to you is national and also personal. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, and we shall meet only in Smachot.
Amen. Amen. Happy circumstances. Thank you all for joining us. Please pay attention. Sign up and register for our newsletter if you're not on it already at the Sacks-Herenstein Center. And join us for our impromptu conversational series to help us bridge the gap between the diaspora and Israel and show our concern, our love, and support. Take care, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye bye.